So here is the episode 3 on what if Naruto was the successor of Lord Zeus. Now let's move on to the video. Naruto was quickly met by a centaur, which he assumed was Chiron in his human form, and a blonde girl about Percy's age. Chiron looked surprised to see them, or at least to see both Grover and Percy knocked out. The girl seemed like she was dressed for a vacation, but she seemed ready to grab a knife that was on her hip if he presented any threat. Chiron noticed that and said, "Annabeth has a friend. I was watching over him and the boy in his arms while I was undercover at Yancy. He managed to identify me just after the event with the kindly one. I believe that he just defeated the Minotaur and saved Percy's life as well." The girl, now identified as Annabeth, slowly backed her hand up from the hilt of the knife, but still seemed to be wary of the blonde in front of her. "Hey Mr. C, as much as I'd like to stand out here all night, I have 2 injured people that need taking care of, and I'd really like to take a long nap." That seemed to get Annabeth's attention, and she looked toward Chiron, who nodded and then gestured for Naruto to follow her to the barn house. They soon formed a neat and orderly line, with Annabeth leading, followed by Naruto, who was followed by his clone, and the rear brought up by Chiron. Chiron looked astonished at seeing the clone, but before he could say anything about it, the clone turned to face him and silently mouthed out the word later before turning back to following his creator. After reaching the house, the clone dispelled and handed Grover to Chiron. Annabeth led the trio up the stairs to what looked like a hospital room, except nicer. It wasn't the normal boring white, but rather an orangish yellow that seemed to glow like the sun. There were several beds lying in a standard hospital format, but they were actual beds, not the thin uncomfortable kind. The notable difference was that there was very little modern medical equipment in the room, something that astonished Naruto greatly. All in all, it looked like a hospital that Naruto actually wouldn't mind staying in. "Here," Annabeth said, gesturing to a pair of beds lying next to each other, "put them in these beds. I don't know if any of the Apollo campers are up right now, so we'll just make do with ambrosia and nectar until the morning." Naruto had no idea what that was, but it sounded like something that would help his friends, so he nodded and fell over. Annabeth and Chiron rushed over to help the blonde, obviously somewhat concerned for him. His vision was blurry and he knew he was being called to his mindscape, so he said, "Hey, I'm gonna go ahead and take a nap, okay? Nighty-night." And with that he collapsed unconscious, leaving a chuckling horseman and a stupefied Annabeth. Naruto's mindscape. As Naruto awoke, the first thing he noticed was the distinctly unsewer-like appearance of wherever he had ended up. In fact, it seemed to him to be like his old apartment in Konoha before he left that world, only less trashed. "Ugh, where am I?" he asked aloud. "Well, you certainly aren't where you expected to be. That's for sure," said a voice to his left. Suddenly, the area changed to one that was overlooked Konoha, at the top of Hokage Mountain. A man in white robes stood on top of the fourth's head, holding what seemed to be Naruto's sword in his hand. He had long black hair and a mustache that seemed to be a combination between a circle beard and a 5 o'clock shadow. His eyes were a swirling tide of green and blue. "Hey Naruto, how's it going?" he said. Do I know you?" he asked. "No, well yes, well sort of," he said, scratching the back of his head. "So what's your name?" "Ah, where are my manners? My name is Raime no Shio, and am your sword." "Right, and I am the Queen of England," Naruto said sarcastically. "No, seriously, I am the embodiment of your sword in your conscious. In fact, I am somewhat surprised that you managed to hear my name on the first time. Of course, you are my first wielder, so I should have guessed that would happen. Anyways, you need to do 2 things to access my full power. The first thing that you need to do is defeat your hate. The second thing you need to do is learn my name, but you've already done that. So, all you need to do is conquer your hate and I can give you my full power," he said happily. "Okay, so how do I do that?" "Well, all you need to do is confront your dark self and defeat him. This will not only allow you to gain control over my power, but also a degree of control over Kura's power." "Alright, so where do I find my dark self?" "Right behind you," a voice said. Naruto turned around to see an exact copy of himself standing behind him, only he seemed darker and much angrier. He wasn't any different than Naruto, except for the fact that his eyes were red. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am you," the dark clone responded. The scenery changed to show the village filled with people, and they saw a crowd surrounding a young Naruto. He was being beaten by many in the crowd, while those who stood didn't, simply stood and watched silently. "They hurt us," the dark Naruto said. "We want revenge. We want justice to be done. Yes, they hurt me, but I don't want to hurt them, I want their respect. But you hate them, don't you? You hate them for what they did to you or for what they didn't do to help you. You want them dead." "No, I don't. How can I be respected if I hated them all? Then how do I exist?" After Dark Naruto said this, the scenery changed again to what looked like Team 7's training ground. "I am your hate, Naruto. Embrace me, and we can destroy everything that ever wanted to harm you, everything that wronged you. We can get revenge on your father, who abandoned you, and make the world rue the day that they crossed us. Embrace the darkness." Naruto could feel a part of himself wanting to join his dark self and give in to the hatred. Then, images flashed through his mind. The Sandom, Iruka, Kakashi, Grover, Percy, and images of what he thought his mother and father looked like. That may be true, that I have hate for some people, but I have to accept that you are a part of me. I still want to prove them wrong. I will prove them wrong. Thank you for showing me this, but I don't need you anymore. I have friends who care about me and a father who I don't hate for abandoning me, but rather admire him for being able to make the tough choices. I don't need you anymore, but I will remember you and what you have said. Thank you. Dark Naruto looked shocked at what Naruto had said before a bright flash engulfed him. When the flash cleared, the man wearing the cloak stood there in place of Naruto's hate. "Well, it looks like you've managed to cure us of our hatred," he said. Naruto was surprised by the man's appearance. It looked like the man from his dream. No, it was the man from his dream. "Hey, how'd you get here? Weren't you a part of my dream?" The man chuckled a bit before saying, "I'm not from our dream, and I'm the image of what you could become in the future." What sounded like thunder boomed in the distance, and the older Naruto seemed to be listening to it before he turned back to Naruto and said, "Well, it looks like it's time for you to go. We'll meet again." Another bright flash encompassed them both, and Naruto suddenly found himself back on top of Hokage Mountain, standing in front of the man with white robes. "Well, it seems you've conquered your hate and gained full access to my power. This will be the last time we meet unless someone invades your mindscape. Also, if we do meet again, just call me Raimei. In battle, to use my full power shout, rise. Thundering tide, and you'll be able to feats that many consider impossible. Now then, I think Kuro wants to see you, so enjoy that, bye." And with that Raimei clapped his hands together and disappeared. Naruto saw another bright flash and suddenly found himself standing in Kuro's cell. "Man, I am really getting tired of that." "Oh really Naruto-kun, well then, consider this your punishment for getting yourself in such a dangerous situation." Naruto turned around to see Kuro smiling evilly. "Oh shit," was the only thing he managed to think before he was grabbed by the Queen of the Foxes and dragged off to see bright flashes for the rest of the night. Back in the real world. Naruto woke up with a jolt which surprised Annabeth, who had been watching over him and Percy since they came in. Annabeth hadn't really had anything better to do, so she watched them overnight. She found the blonde to be rather amusing, as all night had been mumbling something about no more bright flashes. "Ugh, where am I?" Naruto asked. "You're in Camp Half-Blood, more specifically our camp hospital." Naruto visibly cringed at the word hospital, which caused Annabeth to smirk, seeing as she now had blackmail on her fellow blonde for the future. Naruto turned to look at the girl, who he quickly identified as Annabeth. Or at least, that's what he thought her name was because that's what the centaur was calling her. "Annabeth, right?" Seeing her nod, he smiled and said, "Name's Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze." "Annabeth Chase," she said smiling, "now that you're up, I have a feeling that Chiron is going to want to talk with you. Do you need help getting up?" "Nah, I'm fine. How's Percy?" She looked over at the boy in question and said he's fine. He got a nasty concussion, but he should be up either today or tomorrow. Getting up, Naruto felt like something was missing. Checking his pockets, he found that both his sword and his wallet were missing. "Hey, do you know where my wallet and my pen are? The pen is a gift from my dad, and the wallet contains some ID cards I might need, as well as my only photo I have of my parents." He was lying, of course, as he still hadn't gotten a picture of either of his parents, but he did have a seal for some of his shuriken and Hirishin kunai on a slip of paper in there. "Sure, here's your wallet, and your pen was put into storage for safekeeping," she said, causing Naruto to frown a bit. "Alright, thanks," he said before he snapped his fingers and Raimei appeared in its sheath on his left leg. Then he channeled some chakra into his wallet, causing a kunai pouch to poof into existence on his right leg. "So where are we heading?" Annabeth, who was somewhat shocked by the sudden appearance of the pouch and the sword that they'd taken halfway across the camp and stored in a locked shed on Naruto's person, only gestured to the door to the porch. Naruto nodded and opened the door saying, "Ladies first," which caused a combination of a glare and a blush from Annabeth before she stepped outside, quickly followed by Naruto. He was immediately surprised by the camp. It reminded him a lot of Konoha in that it had a very large forest off to one side. The camp was in a valley that stretched to the ocean and seemed to have Greek-style buildings dotted across the landscape. It was truly a beautiful sight. As they rounded around the porch, Naruto began to hear someone that sounded like Chiron talking to someone else before he saw Chiron in his wheelchair sitting across from a middle-aged man who seemed rather plump and had really curly black hair. He didn't seem very threatening, but he had an aura of power that Naruto picked up on immediately. Probably a god, Naruto thought. Grover was there too, standing next to the middle-aged god with a pair of obviously fake feet on. "Ah, Naruto, now we have four for Pinnacle," Chiron said, gesturing to a chair to the right of the man. The man just looked up with bloodshot eyes and said with a sigh, "Well, I suppose I must say it. Welcome to Camp Half-Blood. There. Now don't expect me to remember you or anything about you, or to even care for that matter." Naruto, as he took his seat, was racking his brain to figure out who this god was, but only one really fit the bill. "Thank you, Lord Dionysus. I'm honored to meet you." Everyone there, including Dionysus, looked surprised that Naruto was able to recognize the god of wine without being introduced first. "Okay, I'm interested kid, what's your name?" That shocked everyone there as Dionysus never asked for anyone's name or seemed to be interested about anything. "Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, at your service. By the way, could you give me a glass of sake? Where I used to live I acquired a taste for the stuff, but since I came here I haven't had any." Everyone by this point was in a constant state of shock, Dionysus by the kid's name and the other three, at the blatant request of an alcoholic beverage. Dionysus recovered first and quickly changed the conversation over to Japanese. "Are you from the elemental nations?" he asked. "Hi, from the village hidden in the leaves, or Konoha, Dionysus-sama. Are you the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoko?" "Hi, although she prefers to be called Kura." "Last question, what ninja rank were you?" "Genin, Dionysus-sama." Changing the conversation back to English, he said, "Sure, one glass of sake coming up. By the way kid, just call me Mr. D. Dionysus makes me feel old." Naruto deadpanned and said, "You're old." Mr. D smiled and said touché before he snapped his fingers and a bottle of sake appeared next to a sake glass, and he gave both to Naruto. Tyron immediately started yelling at Dionysus, saying you can't give alcohol to a minor. Dionysus turned toward Chiron and glared saying, "Hess not a minor, Hess a ninja, and by his laws is allowed to what he wants. Besides, he can't get drunk anyways, and it's more like water to him." That left Chiron speechless. His eyebrows seemed to be permanently raised into his forehead, as were Grover's and Annabeth's. Tyron eventually recovered and turned toward Annabeth, saying, "Annabeth, would you go check on Naruto's bunk? We're putting him and Percy in cabin 11 for now." She nodded and turned to leave before Naruto said, "Thanks, but as long as you aren't expecting rain, I think he'll sleep outside." Then he turned toward Mr. D and said in Japanese, "It's been a while since I've been able to sleep under the moon. I would really appreciate it if I were allowed to." Mr. D switched the conversation back to English and said, "Sure, go ahead and sleep outside. I think cabin 11 would appreciate not having to share more space." Then he quickly changed the conversation back to Japanese and said, "Though I think you want to pray to Artemis for permission. She might think you're a pervert or something if you don't." Naruto both blushed and paled at that thought. He knew through the old stories about what Artemis did to perverts. He was going to make certain he prayed to Artemis as soon as he could. "Would you guys please stop switching languages? It's getting pretty annoying," Chiron said while rubbing his temples. Dionysus just huffed and laid back in his chair, while Naruto just scratched the back of his head and said, "Gomen." "Alright then, Annabeth, would you kindly show Naruto around camp and then get back as soon as you can? I want you to be here as soon as you can be." Annabeth sighed and said, "Sure, anywhere in particular?" "Show him around the cabins, the mess hall, and to the forest, and then have him join in any activities that he wants." Annabeth nodded and started out the door with Naruto, leaving a stressed centaur in a foldable chair and a god arguing with the sky about how a kid could have alcohol, but he couldn't. They made quick time to the cabins, not really talking unless they passed an important building, such as the strawberry fields or the barn house, which Naruto could have sworn had something moving in the attic of, but he said nothing. He was worried about Grover, who seemed really stressed out at the meeting, and Annabeth had her mind on other things. Finally they reached the cabins, and Annabeth explained the symbolism of each one. Naruto felt drawn to cabin 1 and 3, but didn't say anything. He also noticed that neither Hades nor Hestia had a cabin and asked Annabeth about it. She responded by saying that Hades didn't have a cabin because the Olympians labeled him as an outcast, which Naruto scowled at, and Hestia was a virgin goddess that was mostly forgotten after she gave up her seat to Dionysus. Naruto was saddened that the Olympians forgot about their own family, but said nothing. After that, she showed him the mess hall and explained how to offer to the gods and what there was to eat. She also explained that there were basically infinite amounts of whatever it was that you wanted. This of course made Naruto's mouth water at the thought of eating continuous ramen. Finally, they stopped at the entrance to the forest. To anyone else, it may have seemed big, but to Naruto it actually seemed really small, or at least compared to Konoha's forests. "Well, here we are, final stop on the tour of the camp. So what are you going to do now?" Annabeth asked. "Well, what's happening later?" There's a sword fighting class in 15 minutes, which lasts until 11:45, then there's a master's archery class at noon with Chiron instructing, and blacksmithing and other activities are day around. Cool, well, I think he'll check out the sword fighting class. Thanks Annabeth. Annabeth nodded and both went their separate ways, with Annabeth heading back toward the big house and Naruto heading to the training grounds. They got there just in time for the class to start. There wasn't any real teacher, it just seemed to be campers practicing against other campers. Naruto paired up with a kid named Luke, who was evidently the best sword fighter in the camp. So you're new here, huh? Well, allow me to show you the ropes. Luke said before he lunged at Naruto, who blocked the strike easily and replied, I already know my way around, I'm just looking for a challenge. And with that Naruto parried and began using some of his own katas. Within 5 minutes, the duel was over, with the blunt side of Naruto's blade resting on Luke's throat. You've got some skills, Luke, but I think that you need a bit more practice. Go again? He asked offering his hand to Luke who accepted it and said, thanks. How did you get that good anyways? Aren't you new here? Yeah, but I've been learning how to use a sword for a while now. At this point they both noticed the silence that had appeared and looking around they found that every camper there was staring at them, or specifically, Naruto. Naruto smirked and said, well, I bet I can beat all of you. To sweeten the deal, I'll offer my sword to anyone who can beat me. But if I beat all of you, I get to be the teacher of this class and you all owe me a favor. Everyone, including Luke and the Aries kids, looked shocked at the blonde's declaration. Are you sure Naruto? You do realize that you just challenged everyone here, right? Yep, and no one's going to lay a scratch on me unless they come at me with the intent to kill. So shall we? He asked with a smile. Luke and the rest of the campers smirked and Luke said, of course. Then everyone charged at Naruto. Over an hour later, and all of the campers had learned one thing. Don't bet against Naruto Uzumaki. All of the campers that had been in the class were on the ground and most were moaning about the beating they got. The only ones still standing were Luke and some of the Aries campers, but they were all disarmed and had surrendered, albeit begrudgingly, to the blonde ninja. Good match everyone. Seeing as how I'm teaching this class from now on, I want us to meet daily starting in 2 weeks. Somehow, I have a feeling that something is going to happen later that is going to take up most of my time. In the meantime, I want you all to practice like you did today, though not all against one. The class just groaned, but acknowledged that the blonde should teach the class, seeing as how had just beat them into the ground. Class dismissed, Naruto said before walking off to join the master archery class. When he got there, he saw a lot of what he recognized as Apollo kids and some others stringing bows and beginning to get into firing position. Chiron looked over at Naruto, who was picking up a box and a few arrows. Needless to say he was surprised the blonde sword wielder. Naruto, what are you doing here? This is a master archer class. Should you be off exploring the camp? Naruto chuckled and said, nah, I already did that and I just got done kicking the hell out of your swordsman class. Mind if I try my hand at shooting? Chiron's eyebrows resumed their position on his forehead. He had expected the blonde to go to the swordsman class, but to beat them all and then go to an archery class. He half expected the kid to be able to make clones or control the wind by now, muhahaha. Alright Naruto, you get 5 shots. Do your best to hit the bull's eye and don't be disappointed if you miss. The archery class stepped back from the firing line, allowing to step up and chose his target. He quickly drew his bow and nocked an arrow and steadied his breathing before releasing his 5 shots within a span of 5 seconds. All 5 hit dead center, with each arrow going through the next. And the last one going through the target and hitting the ground behind it. Needless to say, Chiron and the campers were shocked. No one had ever done that before and on their first time no less. Chiron walked up shakily to the blonde and said, Naruto, can you do that again? Sure, he replied, before being handed 5 new arrows and a further target and just like before, all of the shots hit dead center. One of the campers whistled with envy and Chiron walked up to Naruto and said, well, I think I just found the new teacher for the archery class, would you mind teaching it Naruto? Naruto smiled and said, sure, but can you keep teaching for the next week or 2? I have a feeling that something else is going to need my attention. Chiron grimaced and said, sure before Naruto asked, by the way, does the camp have any spearman class? If it does, I may just make a combined combat class out of the archery, swordsman, and spearman classes. Chiron, who by this point thought that the blonde was an enigma worthy of Daedalus himself, asked yes, we do. Why do you say that you may just make a combined combat class? Naruto smirked and said, because I already agreed to teach the swordsman class when I beat them, that's why. Chiron looked even more astonished at that and began murmuring something about a new Alexander before a loud flushing noise was heard followed by something that sounded like the crashing of waves. Well, sounds like Percy's awake. See you later Chiron. Naruto said as he started sprinting toward the source of the noise. When he got there, he saw Percy and a girl he identified as Annabeth walking out of a destroyed bathroom looking at three girls sprawled in and covered by mud. "You're dead, new boy. You're totally dead," he heard one of the girls say. Naruto thought now might be a good time to show some of his powers and threw a Hirishin kunai in front of Percy's feet. Seconds later, he appeared where it stood with the kunai in his hand and said, "Care to repeat that?" Percy, who was about to give a rather snarky and unnecessary reply, was saved by Naruto and his sudden appearance. He and Annabeth, who had seen his sword and kunai pouch appear out of thin air, weren't as surprised as the rest of the campers at his sudden appearance. Annabeth's mouth was hitting the proverbial floor though, as she began to go through the various uses of this ability on the battlefield. Claris, who was already pissed off, just got more pissed when she saw Naruto appear and was about to give her own snarky reply before her friends interrupted, saying in unison, "Sorry sir. We didn't mean your friend any harm." They had both been in Naruto's new swordsman class, but Claris didn't know that, so she started yelling at her friends, saying, "Why are you saying sorry to him? He looks like a complete weakling." Naruto decided to show off a bit and channeled some chakra into his pinky before he picked her up with a digit. "This is why," he said looking for a name. She didn't give one, but her friends did. "This is why, Claris, your friends were being respectful." He finished before he threw her back on the ground. Looking up she asked with a growl, "Who are you?" He smirked and said, "The name's Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, new instructor of the swordsman and archery classes and soon to be instructor of the spearman class and the new combined combat class, and if I hear you threatening my friends again. Let's just say that even Hermes won't be able to compare with my level of pranking." Naruto started laughing manically, causing Claris and her friends to cringe as they made a hasty retreat. Annabeth just looked between Naruto and Percy before Percy broke the silence. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking," she said, "that I want you both on my team for capture the flag." After the toilet incident, people started staring at Naruto and Percy wherever they went. With Percy they said something about toilet water, or maybe they were just talking about Annabeth who was still soaking wet. Naruto really wanted to use a wind jutsu to help her out, but he already had enough attention as it was. People started just staring at him, not really knowing what to call him, though Naruto did hear something about New Alexander as he passed by one of the archery kids. Annabeth began to leave, saying she had training, but was stopped by Percy, who said he was sorry for the toilet incident. Naruto heard Annabeth say that Percy needed to visit the oracle, and then heard something about naiads, and then they got into parents. Annabeth's mom was Athena, Naruto already knew that, but when Percy asked about her dad, things got pretty touch and go. He wasn't helping any though, seeing as he was just standing off to the side. Finally, they got on to the topic of the winter solstice. Naruto remembered that it was right after that the weather started getting weird. Evidently the camp had taken a group of campers to Olympus, and after they left the Olympians found out that something was stolen. Naruto put that in his mental notebook for later. It felt to Naruto like he was the third wheel on a date, so he just slapped Percy on the back and gave Annabeth a friendly wave before running off to find the spearman training grounds. After about 15 minutes of walking he found them in a training ground on the far side of the camp. It was located near the shore, on top of a somewhat high cliff overlooking the docks. It didn't have very much to it, but it did have a device that would move a sandbag forward like a charging horse, so that the practicing spearmen would have to dive out of the way or stop it with their spear and strength and nothing else. Unfortunately for Naruto, the main group of campers that were a part of the spearman group were from the Ares cabin, and they were led by Claris. "Hey, Blondie, what are you doing here?" she asked as she saw Naruto approaching. "Didn't you hear what I said? I told you I was going to take over the spearman class. So here I am." Claris and her fellow campers scoffed at that, "Please, like a newbie like you could take over this class. I mean, I can understand sword fighting and archery, those guys are wimps, but do you really think you can take us on?" Naruto smirked and said, "Alright, if I can beat your highest score on stopping the horse machine over there, do you guys agree to let me teach this class?" It was Claris's turn to smirk as she said, "Sure, so what do you want to start at? 10 miles per hour?" Naruto smiled and said, "Nah, I was thinking more along the lines of 40. The entire class, including Claris, was shocked. That was 15 miles per hour less than the top speed on the machine and 5 miles per hour higher than the highest speed. "Alright, but don't come crying to me when the thing breaks every bone in your body," Claris said as she handed Naruto a spear and shield. The camper quickly adjusted the speed of the device to match 40 miles per hour as Naruto got into the Anburikaburu stance that he learned from one of his father's scrolls. The camper behind the mechanism that controlled the machine counted down from 3. At 1, everyone blinked. As they opened their eyes, they all saw that Naruto was still standing exactly where he had been, but the sandbag had disconnected from the machine and was impaled in the ground by Naruto's spear. Needless to say, they officially joined the cult of the high eyebrows. Clarice was the first one to recover from her shock. How the fuck did you do that? I've been here for years, and the best I can do is 25. That record was set 15 years ago. Naruto smirked again and said, well if you want to find out, you're just going to have to join my class, won't you? Clarice stammered a bit as she looked for a decent comeback, but after a few seconds of silence she gave up. Alright, fine, you can teach the class. She said defeated. Naruto smiled and then went into teacher mode. Well, I'll start teaching this class in 2 weeks, but I do want you guys to work on something before I start. It's the beginning stances of the stance I took to stop the sandbag thing. He took out a scroll from his pocket and handed it to Clarice. If any of you manage to master the basic stance that I'm going to show you, then take a look at that scroll for some advanced stances. I also want you to start working on your swordsmanship. Why would we work on swordsmanship? Isn't this only a class for spearmen? An Aries camper in the back asked. Good question. Let me ask you this. Let's say that you're in battle and your spear breaks or gets stuck. If that happened, you would be left with your shield and any sword you had on you. If you don't know how to use your secondary weapon, you could very well die, and I don't think anyone wants that. The class nodded in understanding before Clarice asked, so what's the stance that you wanted to show us? The stance is called Anburikaburubme, or the unbreakable defense. In order to utilize it to its fullest, you need to focus on balance, leg strength, and abdominal strength, as well as a bit of willpower. In this particular stance, you let your legs' arms act as shock absorbers, sending it down to your core and your feet. Alright, so how are we going to strengthen ourselves? Clarice asked. By stopping that thing with your bare hands of course, Naruto replied with a smile. An hour later, Naruto left a battered and bruised spearman class, telling them he expected everyone to be up to at least 8 miles per hour by the time the class started in full. The only response he got was glares and a few cuss words, but everyone was going to do it. He still had a few hours until dinner, so he decided he was going to go and find a place to set up shop for the night. He wandered around for a few hours, looking for something that he just couldn't put his finger on. After about half an hour of wandering around the forest, he found what he was looking for. It was a small clearing in the middle of some really tall fir trees. It was between 2 large hills, but only had a small stream running through it. One of the hills had been degraded to the point where there was a small cliff face created by the stream, but the other hill had a gradual slope, so the stream ran along the cliff. There was a natural barrier created by the forest. The underbrush was thick to the point where the only way to get in without getting lost was either to follow the stream or the path that Naruto had followed. Naruto smiled and wandered around the clearing for a bit before he stopped in the dead center. It was at the top of the cliff face overlooking the stream, with a good view of Long Island Sound. Making a few hand signs, he turned toward where he entered from before he whispered, Doten. Tumsei no Karo. Immediately after he called the jutsu, a small stone path rose along where he had walked to the borders of what he considered to be the battlegrounds for Capture the Flag. As Annabeth had explained it, the entire forest was open game, but most times the game stayed within a certain area unless the hunters of Artemis were visiting. Turning around again to the slope of the hill with the cliff face he said, Doten sekich no tanjim. When he finished that, some stone pillars rose out of the ground, marking his future training grounds. Turning to the sloped hill he made some more hand signs before saying, Doten. Kenjin no Mayatashi. This time, a single pillar rose above the tree line, with what looked to be a ladder leading up to the top. He quickly left the spot where he was standing and made his way to the top of the watchtower. He faced back to where he was standing and made a final set of hand signs before saying, Doten Akuraparisu no tanjim. As soon as he finished, ground started rumbling, shaking everything within a mile radius. The rumbling stopped, but nothing happened, leading Naruto to wonder if he had done the jutsu correctly. He was about to try it again before the ground rumbled for a second time. This time, he wasn't ready and fell onto his back. When he stood up, his eyes almost popped out of his head. The area where he had cast the jutsu was replaced by marble columns about 15 feet high supporting a big roof. Naruto quickly jumped down from his watchtower and ran over to his new home. The front pathway looked like something that you would see in a movie. It was stone, surrounded on either side by cypress trees that had suddenly appeared there. In front of the building, there was a fountain that was modeled after the 12 Olympians sitting in a circle, with a mist jet in the middle of them pouring mist into the air. Naruto ran to the front of the building to find that there wasn't an actual entrance, but rather the columns acted as an entryway by themselves. The inside of the building was beautiful. There wasn't anything like a cabin about it, seeing as it looked like a giant garden. The garden was being constantly rained on by clouds created by misters and a few air currents that flowed through the roof. The roof itself was made of glass but seemed to have its own seasons, as right now it looked like it was fall. There were trees all around the garden that stretched to the roof and they all seemed to be cared for by some invisible force. The garden itself was separated into 5 pieces by 5 marble paths. Those paths met at something that looked like an Odeon, only it was completely circular and had leather seats, kind of like a fancy movie theater. It was structured in a way that made it look like the various seats were being sucked into a whirlpool. In the middle of the whirlpool was a campfire that seemed to change color depending on the emotions of those standing or sitting near it. Naruto found this out because when he moved closer to it, the flames got higher and brighter than they were when he was standing at the steps to go down the Odeon. Exiting the building through the back this time, Naruto found what he could only guess would be his cabin. It seemed to be a completely different world than the rest of the area, seeing as how the first thing Naruto noticed was the Uzumaki whirlpool in the middle of a pair of doors and that it had 2 stories. Naruto pushed inward on the seal, opening the door to his cabin. The first thing he noticed was the decor, which looked as if someone had gone to a ninja supply shop back in Konoha and stolen everything they could before putting it on the walls. Literally everything he could ask for was there, from Naginata to ninja wire. There were several windows on the south and western sides of the cabin, looking out onto the forest and the garden, but on the north and east sides there weren't even any walls. Instead, there were clear drapes that allowed for a crystal clear look over the bay and the stream. The second floor was supported on this side by a few well-placed marble pillars that were decorated with a few gods' busts, mainly the big 3. In the middle of the area there was another fountain with the same design as the one in front, but this one's jet managed to stretch all the way to the second floor. The first floor also had a smithy off to one side, as well as enough metal to make a battleship and then some. The second floor didn't have any ninja tools on it, but instead had paintings of all of the villages in the elemental nations. It took Naruto a second to figure it out, but they were actually live images of the villages, seeing as how Anbu and other squads were hopping to and fro, but never started from the same place twice. There were also a few paintings that Naruto admired in this world on the walls as well, including Van Gogh's Starry Night and Starry Night over the Rhone. On this level, the column supported a balcony that looked out over the entire valley, Camp Half-Blood, and Long Island Sound. In the middle of the balcony was a king-size bed that was surrounded by orange silk drapes, but only had a frame to support them. Next to it was a standalone wardrobe with some new clothes, including a cloak like the one that Naruto had seen himself wearing in the future. The bed was covered by light blue sheets and had a remote control that caused a panel in front of the bed to pop open and reveal a flat-screen TV that had a few channels, but were all a part of a network called HTV. There was also a note on the bed. Picking it up, Naruto read. "Hey there kiddo, me, your grandparents and some of your other relatives worked together to get this set up. Hope you enjoy. Love Dad. DS. Don't worry about Artie thinking you're a pervert. She's fine with it and might I say a little embarrassed. DPS. I dealt with the debts those guys owed you myself. Your yacht is in the docks at camp and your cars, well, it'll wait until you can drive for those. In addition, all profits from your apartment complex and shop are going to your bank account. Nice going, but please don't gamble Dionysus. If he loses, he'll probably turn you into a fox or something." Naruto set the note down with a smile, not even noticing it was in Greek, before he crashed onto his new bed and gave a quick thanks dad before he fell asleep. A few hours later, Naruto woke up to the blaring of a really loud conch horn from camp. He got up quickly and changed into the cloak, which had 9 fox tails stretching from the back to envelope the entire thing, with one tail going up the length of Naruto's spine. He quickly ran to the start of his path and cast 2 more Justu, Kaiten. Ain no Han and Suiton. Inachi no Mizu, which created 2 black flames burning inside of 2 earthen pagoda lamps and 2 small streams alongside the pathway, before he threw a kunai toward the commons. Naruto felt it make contact with the ground through his chakra and instantly jumped to it. Within a second, Naruto found himself surrounded by startled campers. Percy, Grover, and Annabeth though, were not surprised. "Hey dude." Percy called out, "Where have you been all day? I thought that you would be staying with cabin 11. Nah, they look too crowded as is. Besides, I don't want them to know all of my pranking tricks." At that, most of the Hermes cabin mouthed a silent thank you to their fellow blonde, but a few of them, two in particular, seemed more interested in Naruto's pranking ability. Luke, who was evidently head of the cabin, said, "Well, as thanks, do you want to eat with us?" Naruto smiled but shook his head no, saying, "Thanks, but I think that I'll eat with Mr. D tonight. After all, I never got to finish my drink." That made Annabeth chuckle, as when she got back, Mr. D was trying to take a drink of the sake, but every time he touched it, it turned to tea. He finally gave up and transformed it into root beer, but not until he soaked Chiron in jasmine tea, which caused the centaur to be rather irate until Percy showed up. Everyone else scoffed at what Naruto said. After all, Mr. D didn't like anyone, so the chances of Naruto eating with him were slim to none. After everyone filed in, Naruto moved to the side of Mr. D, asking for sake. Dionysus complied, and a bottle of sake appeared out of nowhere, which Naruto took and then asked if he could do some workouts while he was eating, to which Mr. D consented. Naruto went over to Percy and started talking to him, to which he was much obliged. "So why rent you with a cabin?" Percy asked. "Well, to be honest, I don't really feel like I belong with any of them. Know what I mean?" "Yeah, I do. I mean, these guys are nice, but it just doesn't feel right. I just hope I can find out who my dad is soon." Naruto had to fight the urge to facepalm at his friend's stupidity. "I mean, how many gods do you know that have insane control over water?" He was saved by Chiron stamping his hoof into the marble floor. He raised a glass and said, "To the gods." Everyone else, except for Mr. D who was just sitting there, did the same and said, "To the gods." Wood nymphs came forward with platters of various foods, from which Naruto grabbed a steak, a pomegranate, bread, and a few other things. He noticed Percy looking at his newly filled cup of blue soda solemnly. "Percy," he said as Percy looked up, "well, find her. Don't feel down about it, get stronger to protect the people you find precious to you. Make sure it doesn't happen again." Percy's eyes tealed with new resolve as he said, "Thanks," before turning toward a plate of brisket being passed his way. Naruto saw everyone standing up and moving toward the fire, so he grabbed the stuff on his plate and went toward it himself. As the person in front of him said, "Hermes," Naruto was wondering who his father was or who his grandfathers were before he stepped up the fire himself. He immediately scooped everything on his plate, as well as some of his sake, into the flames and said quietly, "To the gods, and thanks Dad and Lady Hestia, to show you aren't forgotten," he said, scooping in some strawberries. When he scooped it in, he certainly wasn't expecting the smell. To him it smelled like a Chiricus ramen, which made him both a little sad, but it also made him hungrier. As he turned to leave, Mr. D, who was still sitting at table 12, said, "Hold on Uzumaki, look back at the flames." Naruto did just that, and the sight of what was there almost made him cry. There was a bowl of Ichiricus ramen hovering just above the fire. "Ichiricus!" Naruto shouted before he grabbed his ramen and began jumping for joy. The rest of the campers had their jaws on the floor. "How'd he do that?" Chiron asked Mr. D, who smiled and said. "Between you and me, he gave all of us gods our favorite food, so we decided to give him his." Chiron's mouth made an O shape before he went back to eating his broccoli. When everyone had returned to their seats, Chiron pounded his hoof again to get everyone's attention. Mr. D got up with a sigh. "Yes, I suppose I'd better say hello to all you brats." "Well, hello. Our activities director, Chiron, says the next capture the flag is Friday. Cabin 5 presently holds the laurels." A bunch of cheering rose from the Ares table. "Personally," Mr. D continued, "I couldn't care less, but congratulations. Also, I should tell you that we have some new campers today, Peter Johnson and Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Mr. Namikaze has also agreed to take over the swordsman, archery, and spearman classes starting in 2 weeks. That's also starting a new combined combat class that all campers are encouraged to attend. Do you have anything you'd like to add, Naruto?" When he finished, he was looking at the ceiling, which made everyone think he was bored. "Nah, except for the fact that my friend's name is Percy Jackson and that I would like to invite you all over to my cabin after dinner tonight, I got nothing to say." The campers were really confused and were looking around to find Naruto. "Oh? And when did you get a cabin?" Mr. D asked, still apparently talking to the ceiling. I made one earlier today. By the way, I'm betting you know who my dad is, so say thank you to him for me the next time you see him." Finally, some camper got the bright idea to look at where Mr. D was looking, where he saw a certain blonde hanging upside down, doing crunches while eating his ramen which was supported by a beam. His only reaction was to start stuttering and pointing at the ceiling. Everyone looked at the ceiling, expecting to see a spider or something, but instead seeing Naruto. He noticed this and decided to give a Kakashi wave, smiling and saying, "Yo. How are you doing that?" One of the Hermes campers asked, to which Naruto simply replied. "I'm a ninja, that's how. I can also create clones and control the wind." As he said this, Chiron promptly fainted from shock, but the camp's attention was focused solely on the blonde. Mr. D cut through the staring, saying, "Well, usually the camp goes and does some campfire stuff, roasting marshmallows, you know. Actually, I don't, but I do have a fire pit that we can use in my main building." "Alright, then as soon as Chiron here wakes up, we'll go. And no, this really isn't up for debate," Mr. D said with a slight but uncaring glare toward the campers. After pouring about a gallon of cold water on the centaur, he woke up and everyone followed Naruto into the forest. Some of the campers were pretty freaked out about going into the forest at night, but most of them just kept going, not really caring one way or another. After about a 5-minute walk, they reached the border of Naruto's property. "Alright," Naruto said, "just follow this path to the main building. It's the big one with the fountain out front. I have some things to prepare before you get there, so see ya." And with that, Naruto hirshened away. Naruto had been waiting for 30 minutes before the rest of the group showed up. All he had needed to do was set the fire for the campfire, so had decided to make some improvements to his new house. Had added a pantry, a real bathroom with a flushable toilet, and a side room for Tori, who had summoned to help him explain what a ninja was. Unfortunately, when Naruto built the room, he built it for a car-sized fox, not a bus-sized one. "Damn, Tori. I thought you said you were going to be the size of a car, not a bus." "Well, that's what I expected too, but this morning you got a power-up or something, and now I'm the size of a double-decker bus. Stop getting so powerful so quickly. It hurts like hell and now I have 4 tails. That means Van Vixens." "Whatever, dude, I know you love it," he said as a red fox got pink. "Anyway, I have guests coming over, so could you shrink down a bit?" "Sure. Where are we anyways?" "Pamp Half-Blood, my house, your room, or what used to be your room." After Tori shrunk down to the size he was before, they moved into the big building to see that people still weren't there. "So, when are they coming?" "I honestly don't know." Not but a few seconds later, the first awestruck camper wandered through the pillars. It was Annabeth, followed by Percy, then Grover, then Mr. D and Chiron, then the rest of them. One by one everyone sat down in the Odeon, facing the campfire, where Naruto had some s'mores being mass-produced by clones. After everyone got a s'more, Chiron asked, "So how are you able to do all of this?" Naruto, who was eating his own s'more, looked up and said, "Probably because I'm not from this world," before he went back to eating. When he said this, a few campers gagged on their food, but the majority of those there were kind of expecting that. "So where are you from?" Chiron asked. "From another world or dimension or something like that, called the Elemental Nations. There are 5 nations, the land of fire, earth, mist, lightning, and wind. We have gods there too, but we also have giant demons. Allegedly, a long time ago a man came along and gave us our powers for peace and to provide leverage against the demons. He defeated a demon that threatened to destroy the world by sealing it inside of himself, but he couldn't hold the power, so he split it into 9 less powerful demons and created our moon." "So what happened to those 9 demons?" Annabeth asked. Naruto's face darkened and said, "They lived in peace for a while, but eventually humans decided to use them for war. They were sealed inside of children, called Jinchuriki, who were hated and despised for something they didn't do." Everyone seemed shocked and saddened. How could people hate a child for something like that? "So how were they sealed?" Chiron asked. "I could explain it, but I suppose it would be easier to show you. Tori, can you help me out with this?" The fox nodded and did some hand signs with his tails, and the room got dark. Suddenly, they were in a forest, surrounded by people yelling stuff out in Japanese. Naruto's voice came from seemingly everywhere, saying, "This is just outside of where I grew up, in the village of Konoha. The people around you are ninja, like me. They are fighting one of the 9 demons." A giant fox crashed through the forest behind them, while those who were fighting were trying to hold it back. Naruto spoke again, saying, "I'll switch the dialogue over to English so you can understand. Hold the line. We need to hold it off until the yondaime arrives." The giant toad appeared in front of the fox, with a yellow-haired man standing on top. The ninja began cheering, saying, "The yondaime is here. We're saved. I think it's time for us to change positions." Naruto's voice boomed out. Suddenly, they were all on top of the toad's head, which grossed some of the Aphrodite girls out, but everyone was too fixated on the fight to say anything. The blonde man called out to the toad, Gamabunta, hold him off. I need a few more seconds. This is harder than it looks, Gaki. Hurry it up. A few seconds passed before the blonde called out Fuinjutsu. Shiki Fujin. The being appeared behind him, which literally radiated death to the point where even Dionysus, who had come face to face with Hades, was shaking in fear. The feeling put out by this guy was at least twice as much as him. Suddenly, a bright flash engulfed everyone. When it cleared, the only one left was the blonde man, who was holding a baby in his arms. Hey there Naruto. This is your father. This will be the last time we see each other for a while. I have to go and negotiate with the god of death for your mother. I hope they see you as a hero. Mark my words, I will come back for you. I know you'll be strong, you have my power and your mother's spirit after all. I'm sorry I had to do this to you, but I couldn't ask anyone else. Above all else, I love you and your mother loves you. Goodbye Naruto. The blonde man disappeared in a flash, leaving Naruto there for a second before he was found by an old man with a grey point beard and a cane, who picked up the now crying Naruto and began going back to the village. The memory began to fade into black. Everyone blinked and found themselves back in Naruto's Odeon. Many of the people there, including Percy, Grover, Annabeth and Chiron, were teary-eyed. After a few minutes, Naruto spoke up again and said, that's how I know how they were treated, because I was one. Now I think that's enough for tonight. Maybe one of these days I can show you guys my team and maybe a mission or two. A few minutes passed before people started to get up, albeit shakily, and walk over to the blonde. Most of them walked over to him and gave him a pat on the back or shook his hand, but some just walked away, unable to face the blonde right now. Eventually only Annabeth, Percy, Grover, Chiron, and Mr. D were left. Mr. D had summoned a bottle of pure sake and was drinking it, surprisingly without interference, while Grover was bowling into Percy and Annabeth was crying into Chiron. How could your own father do that to you? Percy managed to say, I mean, my father left too, but I didn't have a demon sealed inside me and I wasn't hated by everyone like you were. I dealt with it. And I did have some people who cared. The man who picked me up I later considered to be my grandfather, there were the Raymond shop people, and there was Iruka, who I thought of as an older brother. But that's not enough. Yelled a momentarily recovered Annabeth. Naruto looked sadly at her and said, it was all I had. It just made her start bowling more, caused Percy to shudder, and Mr. D to take larger drinks of his alcohol. He already knew what happened to the blonde, seeing as everyone had been informed of what had happened to him when he came here. It was part of the reason he actually respected the blonde, that and having a demon with the strength of a titan inside of him, as well as the fact that he'd probably be one of the few to be able to drink at his level. Chiron was in a temporary shutdown. Sure, he was surprised at Naruto's abilities, but he hadn't thought the blonde had suffered as much as he did. So he asked the only thought that came to mind. So Naruto, do you hate your father for what he did? No, I don't hate him, especially if he got mom back. But either way, I'm probably going to give him and both my grandfathers a nice hard sock in the gut if I see them. After that, I'm open to building a relationship. Chiron smiled and said, do you think you can help me with these four? I think you may have broken them temporarily. Sure, he said before 4 clones popped into existence. Take Percy and Annabeth back to their cabins, help Chiron with Grover, and get Mr. D to the big house. Soon with the clones' help, everyone was gone but Chiron and Grover, who had only just stopped crying. As they were about to leave, Grover turned around and said, you aren't alone anymore Naruto. I hope you know that Percy and I will always have your back, and the same could probably be said for Annabeth and even Mr. D. That last part came out rather oddly for the young satyr, but nonetheless, Naruto smiled and said, thanks G-man. I know. Now off to bed. Grover gave a mock salute and then ran after Chiron and the clone accompanying them. As soon as they were out of sight, Naruto plopped down next on a leather seat next to a now dog-sized Tori. Do you think I did the right thing Tori? Yeah, my opinion is that the sooner you got that over with, the better. Thanks, what do you think Kura? Although I'm glad you got it out of the way, it doesn't help but bring up bad memories for me. I know, but to take your mind off of it you want to help me train. Sure, but you need to get to sleep first, dork. Oh, right, come on Tori, off to bed. But I just got here. Tori pouted. And that genjutsu you didn't take anything out of you? Alright, he grumbled, but I want rabbits too one of these days. Naruto chuckled and put it on his mental to-do list before he went to bed after an exhausting day. This is it for today, to be continued.